Okay.
We're like,
Hey man, how you doing? You all right? Tracy's going. Where you want Tracy to sit? Right here in the middle.
No, right
Right.
there.
You want it right here. You want it right here. Okay.
now you all want to leave, right, when I come up.
No. What's that? And then you know what? Phil, can we bring
We're live.
that book
We're
and
live.
put it here?
Yeah, we're live.
Sorry, man.
Welcome to another edition of the Black Men's Roundtable Discussion Forum. I am your host and co-moderator, Rodney Butler, and all the way to my right is our co-moderator, Maurice Hurry. On the show today, it's our February, it's a Black History Month special, and so for the show today, we will be discussing a little bit of history about Douglas County and how Frederick Douglass and Douglas County kind of merged together a little bit. And we know a lot of people don't know that little factoid. But also we will be talking about teaching African American history in the classrooms of America, K-12, and even at the collegiate level or the college level. We will also discuss where we are as a community since the murder of Ahmaud Arbery back in Glenn County. Tomorrow, Glenn County, Georgia. Tomorrow will be the third year of his murder in that county, and we will also discuss criminal justice and police reform. We're going to talk about maybe reimagining policing in America a little bit. So, what we've done is we have brought a very, very good panel and a special guest that we want to have for you tonight to discuss these topics. They are very well versed on these topics, and I would introduce the panel. To my right is Dr. Bill Willis. He's a professor of sociology emeritus at William Patterson University in New Jersey. I think Bill spent 29 years there, and next to him we have Mr. William Will Bodie Jr. He's a defense attorney and former Georgia State representative and community advocate and leader. And we have a special guest who's going to be appearing with us tonight. And for the first time, so don't jump out of your seats and lose your cool, we actually have a woman on the show for the first time. So Tracy, you're making history again. I'm sure you've made it quite a bit in your life. But Miss Tracy Ruckert Shaw, she is an author and historian. Tracy, come on up.
Come on up, Tracy.
All right.
Welcome to you.
thank you. Let me get situated. Okay.
These chairs are a little high, so with that, our first discussion that we're going to talk about today is a little bit of Douglas County history and how Frederick Douglass played a part in some of the history of Douglas County. This is the book by Tracy. It is called The Ghost of Douglas County. Douglas with two S's, as in Frederick Douglass. And we're gonna talk. You know, we're going to use the book as kind of a encirculation of how we're going to talk about the history and how it's affected in Douglas County. Tracy, if you don't mind, could you kind of give us a little background of some of the history pertaining to what went into your book, basically?
Okay, well, first, thank you for allowing me to participate on this panel. I mean, it means a lot. I think it's important that we have multiple voices at the table and have multiple perspectives, which is really the catalyst for my book. We have to be able to look at American history through the lens of the African American experience. And my book is an African perspective, and it discusses Douglas County's genesis. And it's hard to talk about Douglas County's genesis without, you can't really start it. The county was created October 17th on Monday, 1870. But you can't really start talking about it until you look at the year 1868. That was the year we in Georgia received, at that time, 32 African Americans to serve in the state legislature. There were at that time 28 in the House and then 3 in the Senate. In 1870, the governor, Rufus Bullock, appointed an additional one, which is why you hear the original 33. Actually, in the beginning, it was the original 32. Douglas County, and I will say, as I came to this amazing space tonight, I was reminded just how big this county is.
Yes.
And I thought about how long it took me to get here from downtown Atlanta. I was on Marietta Street to where we are now. And then I want you to think about, go back to the year 1868, 1870, in that year span, and you had people living in this area. And at that time, it was a portion of Carroll County, a portion of Campbell County, and they had to travel to the county seat, and they had to do it closer into the area, going east towards Atlanta. It would take them, if the roads were, not roads, but if the cleared ways were roadways,
Right.
we're not talking about paved.
Right.
So on a good day, it would take them 2 days to do that. And so the people in this area were suffering. It was very difficult. It was causing a quality of life issue. And there was a representative that covered this area of Campbell County, and his name was W.S. Zellers. He wanted to help the people in this area. People trusted him. He was a physician. He was well spoken. And so when it came time for someone to represent their interests, they chose him to do that. He was the state representative covering really parts of this area where we're sitting tonight.
Yes.
When he I want you to go back and think about what I just said about how long it took from where we are right now. Imagine you have to come from Savannah or Warren County or all those other areas and try to make it to Atlanta. It could take you a week or two to get there. And so, as former State Representative Bodie will tell you, the who you have in attendance in the House of Representatives and the Senate, that shapes the law. And it was very difficult for those folks to get there on a consistent basis. So we know from our research that we see the African American legislators, they more often were present, almost in full, not every day, but we looked at the roll, and there were huge absences every day. So you really were at the mercy of whoever you got when you showed up with your legislation. And so on the day that Representative Zeller showed up, he had a proposal for the county, and we have the handwritten proposal, which is in this book, and it's signed by Zellers. It was a handwritten proposal, and he actually spells Douglas County with 2 S's.
Yes.
Now, that's one thing. So we could say for a myriad of reasons that may have been the case. But you do have, again, at that time, the majority African American men in the state legislature. If it doesn't pass the House, Representative Bodie will tell you it doesn't go over to the Senate. So it had to pass that first stage. So it did. Now we can talk about oral history and where that comes into play, whether or not a deal was made to be able to pass it from the House to the Senate.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can also talk about what happened in the Senate. African American men were present there. They all voted for Douglas County. But here's the key to this. The key to it is what the governor signed. What the governor signs is what is law. So for instance, if I wanted to name this town Rooker County and the governor signed it into law, it's Rooker County. You can call it whatever you want to call it. But when the governor, when the documents were rewritten, Zeller's signature, submittal, the governor, it was rewritten for the governor. The governor signed into law on Monday, October 17, 1870. He signed as a rewrite. This county named Douglas, spelled with 2 S's. So we can talk about my perspective, and I lay that out in the book and talk about how I came to this conclusion. It's my opinion and I can have it, but what's not disputable is whether or not the county is really named Douglas, and it is with 2 S's. So I went to look to see if there was legislation passed to change it, because you can change, but I couldn't find it. And that's when I found, through working with the archivists and other historians, that it had never been changed. So today, on this day, February 22nd, 2023, according to Governor Rufus Bullock, the name of this county is Douglas, spelled with 2 S's.
Interesting.
Interesting and laid out perfectly. It's like the old man used to say, put it where the ghost can get it. You put it where the ghost can get it. Anybody else want to chime in?
Where can individuals that are watching tonight find your book? How do they go out and purchase it?
Sure, they can, and I apologize, they can go to Amazon.com, you can find it there. You can go to the Ghosts of Douglas County, Douglas is spelled with 2 S's, .com, and you can purchase it from that website directly.
And as Tracy says, it is indisputable that the document signed by the governor on October 17th, 1870, she has presented in her book a copy of the handwritten record of which the governor signed, which Governor Rufus Bullock signed on the 17th, and there is indeed on page 73 of her book the spelling of Douglas County. The governor, this obviously was handwritten, so whoever wrote it, and that, we can presume that the governor did not himself write it, so the clerk of legislature or whomever at that time spelled it with 2 S's, and he signed it with 2 S's. So, as he said, that is the law of the land, if you want to hold that over there. And I will yield to others who might want to comment on that, but I also have some additional comments that I would like to make just about the founding of Douglas County. So we'll give everybody else a chance to speak if you'd like, and then I will share with you some of the personal explorations and research and study that I have done with regards to the founding of Douglas County.
That's great, and that's exactly what we want to do. Weave it in there with the history. But before we get to, because I know yours might be a little bit. So, Will, legislatively, is there anything
I can make it
that you
very.
want to-
It'll be very brief, but
no, you don't have to.
yes.
No. We want to explain to the people about
Yes.
this history.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think, and I'll be short. Me and Tracy talked about this a lot when she was writing the book. What is critical here, and Tracy laid it out perfectly, is that this bill to pass needed a constitutional majority, which is 2/3 of the House. And our 2/3 of the House right now, being we have 180 members, is 120. If you don't get to 120 or above 120, your bill doesn't pass. And so on this particular day, if I recall, Tracy, it was 89 members of the House present, and I think 19 of those members were African American. But what the key is that the legislators at the time was kind of going against what the rules are, because it's the constitutional majority of the House at its statutory limit at that time, which is 175. Right now, based upon the state constitution, it's at 180. So no matter who is there, it don't matter. It's always 120 is the constitutional majority. So in this particular case, if you think about it, if those 19 legislators who are all African American and part of the 33, original 33, who actually made it to the Capitol that day, if they didn't vote, the bill wouldn't pass.
Right.
We would not have a county which is named Douglas County, either with 1 S or 2 S's. And Tracy proved that in her book because it was another county that was pretty much on the same docket to be voted upon, and they did not get the constitutional majority to create their new county. And so it's very important to know that African Americans were instrumental in the original 33, was instrumental in making sure Douglas County became a county. Now, I would say this, what was their motivation? Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass was the one that helped them to be impaneled after they was basically expelled back in 1868. It took them 2 years, 1870, by really almost an act of Congress and Frederick Douglass being involved. So the motivation was to honor their friend, which Representative Turner and also Senator Tunis Campbell were very close friends with Frederick Douglass. And I know Bill is going to talk about that more, but that's what happens at the Capitol. You have to have the votes. If you don't have the votes, your bill doesn't pass. And the original 33 helped pass this bill.
And let me just say this too, beautifully said, perfectly said actually. We've had, one of the things we did in pulling this book together, I made sure that I had constitutional scholars to review it. Representative Bodie was one of those scholars who reviewed it. I had many attorneys, across ethnicities, to view this text and to give opinion, because we had, it was being interpreted by some circles that just because the governor signed it doesn't mean, that didn't make it law. So that was a challenge that was placed to the book. So I was prepared for that. So I wanted to make sure that I had multiple opinions by different constitutional scholars who were attorneys, lawyers, and state representatives, and they function in other capacities. So I was okay with that. I felt comfortable with that. The other one was whether or not Stephen Douglas, at one point when he was an infant, that his name was spelled with 2 S's. Here's the deal. Representative Zellers, in his bio, and that is housed in the state archives, it was not written until 1880 or 1881. So sometime later is the first time you hear of this county receiving a written history. That's when he said that he was an ardent supporter of Stephen Douglas. But mind you, by that time, the African American legislators were out of office. He's someone who voted for him because Stephen Douglas ran against Abraham Lincoln. So you have to think about that as well. These black legislators were attorneys, they were politicians, they were farmers. These were intelligent men. Yes. Now, did we have some that may or may not been literate? That the record doesn't speak to that. But you have to think 2 things. By the time Stephen A. Douglas is presented in the general form, especially when he ran for office, we had never seen, and I've not seen, where Stephen A. Douglas's name has been published as Douglas with 2 S's. It has been spoken of. I think someone came to me and said it was in Wikipedia, which I'm always, listen, you Wikipedia historians, listen, because people call me with that. You can change and alter Wikipedia. Right. And so that's why it was important that we went back to primary documents. We've had people present us with the secondary document, which was the book of laws that came out of 1870. And they held it up and said, see, this is the first time it was ever typed. It was ever written. Douglas is spelled with 1 S. So I looked at that and I appreciated that. So I said, well, I work for an engineering firm. We do all kind of calculations and we do all kind of narratives, but it has to come from something. So I asked the archivist, where did that type text come from? I want to see that. And it was not easy. We had to, go through security. We got to be signed in. They stood over my husband and Brandon and I while we stood there and we turned the pages. And that's in the written text is where we find it. So I say that, and I will wrap up. No. That it is an instance where this shows us where something or someone as a typesetter could inadvertently or diabolically change history.
Before you start, well, I'll tell you what, it looks like.
I got it. I have a question.
Go ahead, Maurice.
I'm sure somebody out there is probably wondering, what other challenges did you have as you were looking for these documents? You've got people standing over you. You've got to go through security. You probably had opposition like, oh, we don't have that information. We can't share that with you. What else did you run into trying to pull together a historical document like this?
One, you have to have a love for research. You have to it can't be a chore.
Sure.
So if I can, as long as my boss is not listening, if I could do something all day, every day, it would be to stay in those archives. I just enjoy it. I'm a nerd at heart. And so so you have to develop relationships. And what I've learned, and I actually learned this too from Dr. Willis too, that it's really about the way you ask the question to extract the information. And maybe some people thought, when we got in those archives, I'm gonna tell you, they were the most helpful people. Mm-hmm. They really were. As a matter of fact, the senior archivist who was getting ready to retire, I said, when I was turning the pages, I told Brandon, I said, we're not gonna find it.
Right.
I said, do they always put the names of the county in the written text? He said, yes. He said, most times. He said, most times. Mm-hmm. I said, well, did they put it in here for this one? He said, yes. He said, keep turning. And that he was so helpful. Yes. So I have to say, there were people of all ethnicities that were actually helpful. Intellectuals, real archivists and historians, who didn't have they didn't have anything. It wasn't personal for them. It was just documentation. So I actually appreciate the fact that it is so secured, because we wouldn't want it. I mean, I couldn't have a pen, I couldn't have a highlighter. They said because you could rip the pages, but I have to say that this was it was a blended effort from a lot of very, very smart people.
That's
I will
great.
say that.
That's wonderful.
Well, it looked like they protected some of those documents a little bit better than they protected some of those in Washington D.C. But so that's pretty good. But two quick takeaways, Bill, before we this. If you match up the dates, I think it was 1867. Slavery didn't end in 1862. So we're talking about 5 years after slavery, what these black men are doing. So just hold that as a little perspective for a minute and think about that. 5 years out of slavery. I know some of you may not really, it's a little bit boring to you because you may not live in Douglas County. We know we have viewers that are not in Douglas County. But with 159 counties in Georgia, you might want to check out your county. You might want to check out your county, do a little research, because you might come up with something. Dr. Willis.
Yeah, just a comment on the experience at the Georgia Archives. I would have to absolutely attest to the fact that the folks there, for the work that I've done, they were very, very helpful. They're very kind, very courteous, very pleasant. And you get a card,
Yes.
which grants you access to the Georgia Archives, and it's a lifetime card, I think, if I remember correctly. I carry it, I have it in my billfold, so that once you get it, once you're admitted, you can go back into the archives as often as you might need to or want to. But you do, on the first visit, have to pass certain kind of screening and to get in. But again, those folks I found to be very helpful. There are a couple of things that I want to say about an experience having to do with the founding of Douglas County and the naming of Douglas County. When I first arrived in Douglas County in 2008, because I had been a social activist literally from my teenage years, I've got a variety of documents around the walls here of my involvement and getting thrown in jail back in the 60s, along with a lot of other civil rights and social activists for things that I was trying to do in Boston, while other activists all over in California, Chicago, Washington, D.C., obviously, and other places that we all know about, were doing what they were doing. Some of us up north were also participating in various kinds of civil rights and social activist things. So when I came to Douglas County, I was interested in and curious about knowing as much as I could, learning as much as I could about the county. So I visited the museum, and it had a joint name at that time, the Information Bureau, Visitors Bureau, I think it was called, and the museum shared this little corner space. And the Arts Council, I'm interested in art, so yeah, I visited the various places around the county and made a stop at the county courthouse. And while I was in the lower level of the county courthouse, I came across a document, a framed document, which literally blew my mind. I was shocked, stunned. This document talked about the founding of Douglas County and acknowledged that Douglas County had initially been named for Frederick Douglass, and that the name, and was subsequently changed, of course, in recognition of Stephen Douglas. So I said to myself, wow, I said, I am amazed. These folks are acknowledging that the county was named first for this abolitionist, and we can imagine, for political reasons or what have you, power and those kinds of things, it was changed at some point. No information about when or why, but that it was changed and named in honor of Frederick Douglass. So, interestingly, I have a copy of, all due respect to the lack of authority of Wikipedia, as Stacey has pointed out. But I think it is interesting to note that this document, which I printed out from Wikipedia, in 2009, the year after I had arrived, with regards to the name of Douglas County, formed soon after the end of the U.S. Civil War, Douglas County was originally named by the Reconstruction Legislature after Frederick Douglass, the Civil War era abolitionist. However, the official honoree was later changed to Stephen A. Douglas, an Illinois senator and the Democratic opponent of Abraham Lincoln in the presidential election of 1860. Now, fortunately, I have that, and the date is on the body. When you print out something from Wikipedia or any other online source, the date of the publication of that information is generally attached with that information. I have been trying to get a copy of that document for the last 2 weeks. Interestingly, it has disappeared. The document, that framed document that hung on the wall in the bottom of the county courthouse. I can't find it. I'm going to continue to pursue that, but up to now, I have not been able to find it. However, this is a document which I published from Wikipedia on February 20th, 2023. And it says, of course, that Douglas County is located in the county was created during Reconstruction after the American Civil War, and technically the declaration, of course, was actually April 9th, 1865, but the General Assembly named it after Stephen A. Douglas. Now, where does Wikipedia get their information? Why in 2009 would Wikipedia have a summary statement on the founding and the history of the formation of Douglas County that says it was named after Frederick Douglass? And when I published, looked up this piece for this session, for this meeting, it says that it was named after Stephen A. Douglas. Why the discrepancy? Who gave them the information that differed in just a few days ago from the information that Wikipedia published in 2009? So I just thought that we might find that as a kind of interesting anecdote.
Well, can I respond to that?
By all means, by all means.
So there was an author, historian by the name of Fannie Mae Driscoll Davis. She, in the 1980s, published a book, and I don't want to butcher the title, but it's something like From Indian Trail to 20. I don't want to butcher the title because I'm not looking at it. But that book is where the plaques that you reference. Yeah, that book is where the language from the plaques, the language was extracted and placed in the courthouse where it hung, and I've seen it for many, many years. Now, you do have those who challenge now Fannie Mae Driscoll Davis. The people who are challenging her are saying, well, show us the document, and it was oral history, so she didn't have an actual document. She got that information from an oral report. So with that, I'll say quickly, much of African history in this country is written in between the lines of the official record.
Absolutely.
My mentor, Harvard professor Annette Gordon Reed, wrote the blueprint for how you investigate African history in this country. And it starts with building evidence. Evidence, in attorney, doesn't necessarily, evidence and proof are different, but for African history, if you say, well, give me your sheet of paper, I have mine, where's your sheet of paper? Well, you might not have that. So we are stuck in a lot of instances with building a wall of proof. A lot of times the requirement for African history is they require, and I say, I'm using the word they, but people who are challenging, that could be anyone.
Right.
They require that every brick of evidence amount to its own wall of proof. And that is not the way we have to construct our history. In many cases, not in all, or we would have known about hidden figures. We would have known about a lot. A lot of times it's in between the lines. And so what we try to do, and I say we, it's a collective effort with this book, is to build the case logically of evidence, and we created a wall of proof. And so we have to use that to discern or make the decision whether or not we believe, based on even oral history, whether or not we believe. Now, last, I just interviewed someone who just recently turned 100 years old.
Wow, okay.
She's amazing. I was like, we have to capture her.
Yes.
So we did the interview. It was amazing. We got ready to leave. And I said, wait a minute. Turn the cameras back on. I go back because she's sharp, clear and sharp. I said, can I ask you one last question? She said, of course. I said, did you ever hear that this county was named for Frederick Douglass? She said, sweetheart, all my life, my mom and dad talked about that in our kitchen.
Wow.
She has lived 100 of these 153 years that the county has been in existence. So her mother and father gets you closer back to the genesis of the county. So what I'm saying with this is, we have to ask, why is this a trigger? I mean, I think it's a beautiful history. Let's say we take Frederick Douglass out of it. To Representative Bodie's point, we still have a county that would not have been in existence had it not been for the votes of Africans. My thing is this: honor the scholars honor the representatives
Exactly.
that voted for really, they're part of the founders of the county.
That's
In
right.
a sense.
That's right.
So I just think that there's a different standard because our history was not always documented the same. And if you try to hold it to that same test as a group that always, that did a better job of documenting, I think we don't ever rule out oral history. It is a component. It is oral. From the oral, you can go to the secondary. From the secondary, you can go to the primary. You take the three, pull them together, and you do an analysis.
That's right.
That's what intellectuals do.
That's right.
And Ryan, I want to add this. What Tracy is saying is spot on.
Yes, sir.
But
Dead
I just want to applaud her because she has concrete evidence.
Concrete.
Like, I've served as a state legislator for six years. And anytime you have a bill, that bill is very precious for a lot of different reasons. It is a legal document.
Yes, sir.
So when you are a co-sponsor of the legislation, you sign your name onto it, you made a part of the record forever. And when the governor signs the bill into law, now it's an act. And that act cannot be reversed but for another piece of legislation.
Yes, sir.
So in this particular case, it's no ambiguity here. It's on paper. The governor signed it. Governor Blaylock signed it. Bullock signed it. And so it's law. And so until some other act, some other piece of legislation comes behind that to change that law is the law of the land. And it's still on the books today.
You know, it's interesting how what Tracy said earlier, you have to have that piece of paper. But there was this fellow named Alex Haley, wrote this book called Roots. How did he go about writing it? It was passed down word of mouth. Hey, you came from. These are all of the. This is your. This is your history of where your ancestors came from. Right down the line, every person along the way in their legacy, until they got to Alex Haley, where he said, "Wow, I remember my grandmother, my great grandmother talking about," and then he put it all together. He eventually found all the pieces of different records here and there. But a lot of our history was taught to us by word of mouth because when our forefathers came here, you couldn't speak your language. You couldn't read, you couldn't write. So you had to do it the way you could do it. Let me tell you about it around the fireplace. Let me tell you about it at church. Let me tell you about it while we're having dinner. So you pass those stories on.
And can I tell you my Alex Haley reference to this book? And is that when he was in the archives, he had found, and through mapping his family, he went to a farm and he said, I know they're here, but he couldn't find them. There was an older woman sitting and he was angry and she said, what's the problem? And he said, I know my people, they should be here. He said, but I can't find them. And she said, the problem is if you are looking for African born before 1865. Your problem is you're looking for people when you should be looking for tools.
Yep.
And so he
That's
goes to
true.
the tool register
Yep.
and he finds a rake and a plow and Sally and John. They were always there. Those aren't the official records. And he could have left that farm and never found them. History sometimes can be written in between the lines of the official records. Did they not exist because they weren't on the original deed or not the deed, but the documents tying to the property? Did that mean they didn't exist? Were they not human and they were not, in real form? No. You just have to sometimes ask the right questions
question, yeah.
and then go and look in alternate places and then you have to piece your history together.
Excellent.
Yeah, so it's a lot. I mean, but and it's amazing how some people's verbal history is treated differently than other people's verbal history. It's looked at as fact when it's on this side. It looked at as something other than fact when it's on this side. So again, I know that a lot of people out there watching may not live in Douglas County, but again, 159 counties in Georgia. If you do the research, I think we'll find that this just doesn't apply to Douglas County. So that's the takeaway from that. All right, what we're going to do, Maurice, I know you got the next topic. We are going to, Tracy, I was going to ask you, if you wanted to, you can definitely feel free to join us and stay for the remaining topics, or it's up to you.
I will stay.
You stay?
Okay.
Okay, great, yeah. Great. Don't worry about the haters. No, it's fine, it's fine. No, I like to have fun with the audience.
Okay.
But, and I think, Maurice, as we transition to the next topic, all of this, we're talking history as Black History Month, but as the topic that Maurice is about to bring up, just like they tried to do with Tracy and her information and all her research, they might be trying to do it in the schools. It's on you, Maurice.
I'll say this. Having grown up in the public schools in a little place called Tuskegee, Alabama, I learned about Alabama history. I learned about U.S. history. And there were a lot of times I didn't see history complete until I saw bits and pieces of Black history. And I asked my history professor, and he told me, he said, you got to understand something, son. When they wrote the book, you weren't included, or this part of Black history wasn't included. But you'll be surprised at some of the amazing contributions that we don't even think about, like air conditioning, for example, that came through Black history. So with that, right now we have African American history in our schools under attack, to the point where advanced placement African American studies are looked at as, oh, this is nothing real. This is not a real subject. And also the critical race theory. A lot of people see it in a negative light. What it is a theory that is trying to shed light on reality. And so I'm going to pose that to our panel today. As we see that our African American studies programs are under attack, Governor DeSantis in Florida is one of them that's really attacking it very hard, trying to really make a name for himself, maybe so he can run for president, who knows. But then also critical race theory. These two subjects are under attack. I'd like to open it up to the panel for your comments on it. And please, any of you that want to jump in?
Yeah, just
Absolutely.
don't order. We just kind of do it relaxed out here.
Okay, so let me just say this, and I just had this conversation the other evening, and it was with a couple of my friends who are Jewish. What I love about what the Jewish community did when I was young is that they went to school, and after school they went to Hebrew school. The community didn't leave it to the school to do certain portions of their education. Now, with that said, our tax dollars go into the system as well.
Yes.
And we as a community by community, can have influence and shape the content that goes into our school systems. And we have power, to do that collectively as a community. But in addition to that, I would like to see African communities take more direct control of that content, because whether or not it is a requirement of certain facts or certain information, you still don't have control of the way that it is presented. It is like my son would say, you put the emphasis on the wrong syllable. So with that, you don't have
I like that.
the nuances to be able to tie some of the text and contextualize in a way, especially if you yourself are not of that culture. That's why I like the concept of Hebrew school, because we can do that and control the content in our communities and have a school where, of course, we make a requirement, our tax dollars are there as well, but then for an in-depth dive in more history and more control, we can do that. We have enough intellectuals and enough money in every community to be able to educate our kids.
You know what, Tracy, once upon a time, we had Saturday school in the Black community. That was Saturday school, and I think out of I hate to say, but out of necessity of what's happening in our schools, we may need to rethink that. We may need to rethink a lot of things, like some of the things that are happening with and I know it's not a topic, but I'm just saying, out of necessity, a lot of things I think going to go back to what it used to be. Like Saturday school in the Black community, like midwives and doulas and stuff, because our women are dying, trying to give childbirth, and I think that a lot of things may come back, or we need a lot of things to come back.
I watched these two bills go through the Georgia General Assembly last session, and I had to start out by saying this. I was the House Democratic Whip back in 2019 session. That's basically second ranking Democrat.
Yes, sir.
At that time we had 75 Democrats. And we had the Confederate Monuments Bill. And it was a bill that I went to the floor of the House of Representatives to argue against the legislation because it took away local control. We have, right here at our courthouse in Douglas County, we have a statue with a Confederate soldier.
We just removed it.
And they just removed
Yeah,
it.
last year.
But this legislation tried to take away the county commissioners and city council members' right to make decisions on whether those monuments can be in a public space. And I argued against that because why are we taking away local control? And Republican after Republican came to the well of the House of Representatives said, this is a part of our Southern heritage. This is a part of our history. And so in 2022, when I went to the well to argue against the book banning bill, I said, Martin Luther King is a part of our history. Black history is American history. So how can we say that Confederate monuments are a part of the Southern heritage, but Black history and Martin Luther King being taught in our K through 12 public schools is not? That just doesn't add up to me. And I felt very, very passionate about it. And even when I went up to my Republican colleagues, they said, well, William, you had a great argument. And I appreciate your argument. But right is right and wrong is wrong. And so I grew up, like Maurice stated, I grew up in public schools here in Fulton County and in Fulton County at APS. And one of the things I remember in first grade, Miss Surratt, is I watched those reel-to-reels of the Civil Rights Movement and the March on Washington. And that gave me pride in knowing that I was born in Atlanta, Georgia, in the same city as Martin Luther King Jr. And that gave me pride in wanting to find out even more about my history so I can build a better community here in the state of Georgia. So that's what our history does, just like anybody else's history. If you learn about yourself and you learn about where you come from, you can help build a better community, not only for your race, but for the whole entire country, for the world.
That's true, absolutely. And with that, if you take out, like you said, Black history is American history. If you take out African American history out of those history books, you might end up with a leaflet because there's a lot there. Dr. Willis, one of the things I wanted you to kind of focus on with this conversation, being that you were, a college professor university professor for so long, and college administrator, is this whole notion about CRT, critical race theory, and it being taught to our children in K-12 when this is, as you know, that is taught at the college level. I think even mostly at the graduate level. But could you let us know a little bit more about this CRT?
Correct. It clearly is a concept that is taught primarily in law school classes.
Yep.
And in fact, certainly Attorney Bodie would probably know more about that than I do. But when you have the kind of response that people like DeSantis and other Southern extremists and Northern extremists who talk about the concern, I'm struck by a little one of the images that some of you may have seen on social media, where a little girl who integrated, I think it wasn't Little Rock, but one of the public schools here in the South, and there's a caption underneath that says, if she was old enough to endure it, to go through it, then the grandparents, the offspring of their grandparents who harassed and booed her should be able to learn about it, should be able to accept that.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Some information, formal information about CRT. First of all, it's not. I mean, I think personally, I would like for us to get away from the continued reference to CRT, to critical race theory.
Okay.
It's history. It's accurate history. It's real history. It's reliable history. It's everybody's history. And recently there have been some support. Well, of course, DeSantis said that if unless the College Board changed the content of the resolution, that he would not allow it to be implemented in Florida. So some advocacy groups, maybe 30, if I can just share with you briefly some of these comments I've highlighted, that more than 30 LGBT advocacy organizations have signed a letter to the College Board demanding the resignation of CEO David Coleman after the organization modified its advanced placement African American Studies course following criticism from Florida's governor and Department of Education there. As submitted, the course is a vehicle for a political agenda, DeSantis says, and leaves large ambiguous gaps that can be filled with additional ideological materials, which we will not allow, DeSantis says. Now, who has provided more erroneous information about political and legal facts in the United States than Donald Trump and his minions with the constant claims about election fraud and other kinds of obviously erroneous information, which apparently, at least now, the Congress, the Georgia Attorney General is about to bring the hammer down, we can hope, and say that 65 courts document said that the elections had not been stolen. And I have said consistently all along, my wife will tell you, that, and people would say, well, we can't make any progress with that because those Republicans believe that the election was stolen, or this contingency, this group believes that. No, they did not believe that. They knew it had not been stolen. 65 courts argued throughout the claims it had not been stolen. I'm sorry, I get emotional about this. Florida has also banned schools from teaching what is referred to as critical race theory, an academic framework that aims to understand racism in the United States. Most experts on this subject have noted that the theory is typically taught in colleges, not elementary or high schools, And just one other comment about what's taught in elementary and high schools. Nobody seemed to have any concern about my being taught about Little Black Sambo in elementary schools in Massachusetts. Not only did the elementary school books that were used in my public schools talk about subjects like Little Black Sambo, there was approximately 1.5 pages that talked about slavery in the United States in my Boston public school, and it was labeled the white man's burden. Now, can you imagine? Literally, I mean, this is the public information that appeared written in the public school textbooks for elementary and middle grade students. The white man's burden. Yeah, you mean you got a real problem taking responsibility for sipping your mint juleps out on your front porch while black enslaved people do all of your work. Despite DeSantis receiving backlash for rejecting the course, the College Board and Florida reportedly sent letters discussing the course framework, and on February 1st, the College Board announced a new curriculum. So the new curriculum did in fact remove some of the issues, and I won't say there's 4 or 5 that DeSantis had insisted upon, so they modified it, but it's still going to be introduced in the at the high school level and in college. The College Board, the letter from the LGBT organization said the College Board met with Florida officials multiple times, made those changes. Course revisions, including topics being made optional, were the result of political partisan pressure. Without the courageous leadership needed for this moment in history, the College Board will continue to be a pawn in the political games of governors and other elected officials advancing white nationalist agenda, anti-democratic agenda. So again, all of the anger and objections to real, true, accurate history being taught in our public schools. I in fact had served as the headmaster. You talked about the need to kind of take control over the presentation of education to our children, to our families. That's been attempted in any number of instances. I mean, there are a number of scholars who have had, there was a woman in Chicago who was one of my heroes. Her name escapes me at the moment, but she had an elementary school in which a series eventually expanded to up through high school, where students were taught Latin, Greek, algebra, and complicated, sophisticated mathematics, and Marva Collins. Thank you.
Coleman.
No, Marva Collins. Yes. What was Escalante's first name out in California that did the same thing with Latino students. I served as headmaster of a private school in Boston, which had been established by the local community to do that. But again, it's a kind of burden. I mean, you're asking people to support, families to support the public schools in urban communities and distressed districts. I mean, folks having a hard time surviving, and to try to support private educational institutions at the same time can be a significant challenge. But I think we need to push back hard on the efforts of the MAGA extremists trying to co-opt, and that's all they're doing, the terminology and the information, the history of our people, trying to make things like woke sound like a pejorative term. I mean, if you're not a woke, you're asleep. You're either asleep or unconscious or dead. So I mean, we cannot allow them to continue to co-opt these terms and project them. Let's make it clear. I'm sorry. I don't know.
I laugh at it every time I see it. And this is the woke, and I'm like, really? Use the term in its right context.
But you know what, Maurice? They do it because it works. We have to stop that. We have to stop They do it because of
Yeah,
purpose.
exactly. And it's a scare tactic.
Yes.
It reminds me, and guys, I mean, look, like I said, I grew up in Alabama. I've gone through places in Alabama that a lot of folks said, don't drive through Coleman, Alabama at night. And you know why? Because they would be burning crosses. I've seen it with my own eyes. Because my sister was in school in Huntsville. And I'm like, man, this is scary. So it's used as a scare tactic.
Absolutely.
From, okay, we can't scare you on the road anymore with a white hood with eyes cut out. Let's scare you with terms and saying your jobs will be taken and your livelihoods will be taken. Things like that to kind of scare you into not believing real truths. So
Can I just comment in just a moment or two about something? And of course, the reasons that they're opposing what they refer to as CRT is because they don't want you to know certain things. And I mean, you could go through a tome of literature that talks about the kinds of things. They don't want you to know, for example, that Christopher Columbus kidnapped Caribbean women and gave her to a crew member to rape. Okay, this is information that again is contained in a variety of sources. That after an attack by more than 2,000 Indians, Columbus had an underling, Alonzo Ojeda, bring him 3 Indian leaders whom Columbus then ordered publicly beheaded. That he kidnapped and enslaved more than 1,000 people on Hispaniola, which now of course we know is a divided Caribbean island. He forced Indians to collect gold for him, and if they didn't collect enough, he had their hands chopped off. That's what
You know what, Bill?
his people don't want you to know.
Exactly. Maurice, we're gonna transition, but before we do into the next topic, I just want to say that isn't it a good thing that that whole Columbus Day stuff is kind of
Now being
on the back burner. It's not being exposed.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
as
you know,
I heard someone say, Columbus was a lost guy.
Very lost.
He got lost. And he's like, I discovered
he
discovered a country. It's like,
he thought
there's
he was
people
in,
here.
He thought he was in India somewhere. But
Yeah, exactly.
But for the people out there watching, get your questions ready because we will be answering any questions that we have to come up online.
Mm-hmm.
And also for the audience, get your questions ready because we will be asking questions from the live audience before we go off tonight. So Maurice, you can go ahead on
I can
close
say
out
I
the
can
topic.
say this with this particular topic. It is not over having this discussion. Continue having the discussions and continue to put the pressure on your local politicians to say, look, let's talk about reality. Let's talk about all people's history. We shouldn't have to have Black History Month, Latino History Month, Native American History Month, Asian and Pacific History Month. It should just be all history, period. Because the U.S. was built off of the melting pot of people coming here. And guess what? We all have different histories. Let's use it to be positive and focus on that.
Okay, Maurice, you got this.
The moving to our very next topic, which was a sore subject then, it's still a sore subject now. And I'm gonna ask this question directly to our panelists and also to our audience out there, both being live streamed and to the audience that's here with us. Where are we as a community since the murder of Ahmaud Arbery in Glenn County, Georgia? Glenn County, Georgia. 3 years ago tomorrow, and the impact of House Bill 479, which was co-sponsored by one of our panelists, Representative Bodie. And I'd really like to ask Representative Bodie about that particular House bill that was sponsored, what came of it, and then open it up to the rest of the panel.
So, no, thank you, Maurice. So the bill actually started, if you all recall back in 2020, everybody remember the pandemic hit us very hard like it hit the world. And so we were in legislative session, and I remember we basically ceased operations, I believe it was March the 16th of 2020. And so we were all working via Zoom and still representing our constituency. When I say us, members of the Georgia House or representatives in the Georgia Senate. But then we had 11 legislative days to go in that June of 2020. So Representative Roger Bruce, my dear friend who represented parts of Douglas County, Representative Carl Gilliard, decided that we needed to have a legislation to repeal citizens arrest after the Ahmaud Arbery murder back in February 2020. So basically, we filed the bill. We had 4 Democrats, including myself, on the legislation. The other Democrat was Mayor Margaret Oliver out of Decatur, DeKalb County. And we had two Republicans. The bill went nowhere, like nowhere. But then we had the summer of social change. That summer, George Floyd murder, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, young people going out and engaging in peaceful protests around the country, around the world.
Yeah.
And so I never forget that January 2021, we were getting ready to go back in legislative session, and I get a call from the governor's floor leader. Hey, Bodie, that's you because we call everybody by the last. Hey, Bodie, government wants to do something on citizens arrest. Can we get some legislation moving? I was like, we can get some legislation with teeth. We can move it, you know. I mean, I need a piece of legislation that the Black Caucus, the Georgia NAACP, the Democratic Caucus, and our grassroots allies outside the Gold Dome are going to support. Mm-hmm. And so the governor's floor leader came back to us with an original document, a draft of the legislation, and our allies said it was not proven enough. It didn't have enough teeth to it. Mm-hmm. And so we went back and we got a final version that was a really good bill that passed. And I was very proud to be one of the lead co-sponsors on the legislation. And so that bill for me was very, I saw myself in Ahmaud Arbery because I went to the well of the Georgia House of Representatives and I gave my experience of being a college student at Valdosta State and running.
Oh yeah.
You know, doing in between classes when I was in summer school back that particular summer back in 1999. And so I thought about it and I thought about my experience, and I'll never forget, we argued the bill on the floor of the House on a Tuesday. That whole weekend, I watched the Ahmaud Arbery videos over and over again. And I imagine if somebody was chasing me from behind with a gun, and I got 2 people in front of me with guns, and this is happening for 4 minutes. I thought about the last 4 minutes of his life, and I listened to those shotgun blasts that ended his life. And when I went to the well of the House, I replayed that moment. And when I sat down, the speaker went to a vote, and every member in the Georgia House of Representatives voted yes to the legislation. It passed the Georgia House unanimously. And, I'm very proud to say that Georgia is still right now the only state to repeal its citizens arrest statute in the country. And so no citizen can do what happened in Ahmaud Arbery's case. And I was very proud to see those individuals, 3 individuals, to basically be found guilty in state court or Superior Court of Glenn County and also in federal court. And so no one will be able to use a citizen's arrest as an affirmative defense in the state of Georgia ever again. And so I'm very proud of that. And I'm glad that we worked with, you know, Democratic Party of Georgia, Douglas County Democratic Party, also Georgia NAACP, and a lot of grassroots organizations, ACLU, the Southern Center for Human Rights, to get a meaningful piece of legislation passed. Yes, and so thank you all. Thank you everyone in this room for helping to pass that legislation.
And what you said was real important. A piece of legislation that had teeth, something that it really means something. You can't do this. So now it makes people think, you know what? I better not try to go be a citizen and try to arrest somebody. I think I might need to dial 911. Let them handle that. So,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's exactly the effect we wanted to have.
Exactly. Any other panelists, comments, questions?
You don't have to just.
Yeah.
No, I think he said it beautifully.
Yeah.
I'm a mom of 2 brown boys, and so to watch it from my vantage point,
Yes.
was impacted me at the cellular level, because that could have been my child, that could have been my son, and as a bringer and a giver of life, it hits differently when you see one taken. And so I remember Representative Gilliard reached out to me, and also the Wall Street, the Washington Post.
Washington Post, yeah.
They reached out to me and said, "Can you give a historical perspective, contextualize this historically? Where did the citizens arrest law come from?" And I was honored to do it for the Post, because everything is rooted. It has a beginning. And if we don't know and understand the history and how it evolved, that also helps to shape the teeth that go into it, because when you understand where that came from. So I just say thank you, Representative Bodie, and to everyone in this room who worked together, the Democratic Party, all the citizens, and it was bipartisan. I'm telling you, to see it is one thing, and it's an imprint, and I think I'll remember that on my last day.
And just to Tracy, what you said was so impactful. The bill was originated, I think, 1863, 1864, there during the Civil War, to allow for white plantation owners to basically deputize citizens, white citizens, to be able to bring fugitive slaves back to the plantations here in the state of Georgia. So that's where the bill comes from. And so it's antiquated, and not only is antiquated, when you look at the legislative intent of the bill, and having individuals who are trying to free themselves from bondage, and having a citizen being deputized to bring them back to their slave masters, it was time for that bill to be repealed. Past time, exactly, past time.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, the whole purpose of that kind of citizen behavior was, as you had pointed out earlier, was a part of the process of intimidation and terrorizing people, so that, again, slaves who had run away, when they were recaptured, obviously were tortured severely, either by beating or in some cases lynching. And the reference that I was making to Christopher Columbus, I didn't went back that far in our history, but the point is that, again, it was those kinds of acts of intimidation and terrorizing members of the community. Some of you may recall James Byrd in Texas.
Yes.
Young man offered a ride by 3 white men who told him they were simply going to give him a ride, chained him to the back of a pickup truck, and dragged him to about 3 miles around town until they went over an aqueduct, and his arm and head got ripped off, dragged him behind the truck. And then, of course, just any number of publications that talk about how women, our mothers and aunts and grandmothers and nieces and daughters were raped, savagely abused, and then you have this, again, this effort to terrorize with the kind of beating to which Emmett Till was subjected for supposedly whistling at a white woman. And again, one of the things they don't want you to know is the kind of brutality that, what kind of an animal, when Goodman Schwerner and the third, Goodman Schwerner, okay, the 3 young civil rights workers who were helping to register folks about,
It was a part of Snake.
Right, and they ended up killing Viola Liuzzo, the white woman who was simply driving them around. I mean, how much hate do you have for folks trying to stand up for democracy, for their own, for the right to vote, that you're going to kill one of your own because she provided a ride for them.
Maurice, before we close this one out,
These are your
in
comments.
in Tracy's comment, as a true historian,
Goodman. I'm sorry.
yeah, as a true historian, as we transition to this last topic, if we have to know the origin of these things, right? Like Tracy said, and I know we're about to talk about, which will be the last one, criminal justice and police reform, or at least reimagining policing. They started as slave patrols. So if we know the origin of all of this stuff, as Tracy alluded to, everything will make sense. But we have to go back. But Maurice, you can close it out.
You know, it is vital. I think it's vital that, you know, in African American History Month, Black History Month, however we title it, that all people understand the different pieces and parts that make up what our America is. And it also is very important that we understand, as Tracy mentioned really well, where these small things that have a big impact on our lives and communities start from, and why the antiquated stuff needs to be gotten rid of, so therefore we can move forward to this era that we're in right now, where, I mean, this is talking about a young man, but then you got chatbots, you've got artificial intelligence talking in the background, doing things, and now does that take over? Does that robot now take over what we do? So I mean, you have to think about it. Let's move from the old stuff that was keeping us separated to newer things that's bringing us all together. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Which brings us to our last topic. I know we usually try to go an hour, but this is a special. So we're going a little bit longer. We want to definitely get to the get as deep as we can in maybe an hour and a half or so of the topics we have for today. Our last topic is criminal justice, police reform. I want to talk about, we don't have time to sit around and talk about, defunding the police versus reform and all that kind of stuff. But what I want to talk about tonight is maybe reimagining the police and looking at policing a little bit differently than what we currently look at it. People say, well, it's broken. Policing is broken. The criminal justice system is broken. I think it's working exactly the way it was designed. It's not broken. We need to stop saying that. It's not broken. It's working exactly the way it's designed. And we need to probably reimagine policing. And so I just want to open it up to the panel.
Once upon a time ago, when I was a little bit younger, now that I'm in my 50s, I remember going to visit my grandparents in New Orleans, grandparents in Selma, Alabama, grandparents in Pensacola, Florida. And I would always wonder, man, they knew the police officers in the neighborhood. They knew Officer Johnson, Officer Jackson. The ministers of the community knew them. Why? Because they lived amongst us. They were part of the fabric of our communities. Me personally, I don't think that's the case now in a lot of communities. And that's why maybe we're having some of the issues we're having with some of the police officers. They live, the ones in, and I'm just going to use, we're in Douglas County, but we might have police officers that work in Douglas County, but they live in Cobb County. They live in a different county. So the impact they have in our county, Douglas County, doesn't really matter to them because they don't live here. So I think a part of that is not living where you work has an impact on you from a policing perspective. Because when you know the people that you're pulling over to write a ticket to, going to their home to say, hey, what's the problem, what's going on, things tend to change a little bit. And I look at it from my own hometown of Tuskegee, Alabama. Hey, my dad was a reserve sheriff officer. So if I got in trouble, they were like, we're going to call your dad. And guess what? You'd be like, oh, that's the last thing you want to do for me. So that having that personal connection to the community, I think helps make policing better and the people understand, hey, you know what? The police officer's not the bad guy or bad lady. They're part of our neighborhood. They're our friends. But if I'm doing something wrong, I have to be careful how I interact and also what I do when it comes to that. And so I think that's another part of it that I think people have gotten to the point where like, I don't care about these police officers. Let's take them out. Because that's the mindset I see with some of our younger people. They don't care about their lives and the lives of other people.
Absolutely.
That's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, and it's not, I think there are police departments across the country who are starting to do things a little bit different. I love some of the stuff that Chief Sparks right here in Douglasville, the city of Douglasville is doing as far as with our youth, as far as with our youth, and it's really making a big difference. So we're not saying that, we're not trying to just beat up, but we're just saying that policing, people always say to protect and serve. There's over 18,000 individual police departments all across America. I don't think any of them say protect and serve. I think they all say serve and protect. And I think that putting emphasis on serving and what policing really, I don't even like the word policing, okay? But I'm just saying, I don't think people have to be policed, but I think that we just need to we need to invest more in the community instead of just keep hiring police officers and those kind of things. Policing is, again, I don't like the term, but I have to use it because that's what people understand. Policing is the only profession that I know where if you don't do a good job, you actually get more money. I mean, you literally get more money. It's like, well, they didn't do a good job, so let's give them more money. I mean, so I'm just, when I say reimagining, that's what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. Not defunding or anything, but there's no other place where I know that that's the case. So, but I understand it's a sticky and a tricky subject. But I just wanted to make sure that people out there know that we are paying attention to our police, and that's why, like I said, we point out the good things that we see. And like I said, Chief Sparks, keep up the good work, with especially the stuff you're doing with the youth. But then we need to continue to build on that. So. All right, so that is all the topics that we have, and I think Representative Bodie, I think you might have to leave. You had another engagement, mm-hmm. So we're going to open it after Representative Bodie. Let's give him a round of applause. You're not going to get around to me. We're going to open it up for some questions and stuff like that, and as soon as we get Representative Bodie on his way.
No, you don't. I'll scoot up. Any questions?
No. Some people may have questions for the group.
I'll come right back.
Okay.
I'm just gonna walk around.
If you have a question, I'll stay for that. If not, I didn't know if you had one for me.
Questions from the audience?
Hey, Joe, let's go ahead and get the volume back up. Okay, and Maurice, you can take
Sure. So we do have a question from someone out in the audience. So I'm going to walk out here and let them use our microphone.
Are we ready to take my questions? Host?
Yeah, let's go.
Okay. Okay. All right, so my question is this. A couple of things, actually. You were talking about Florida and, not teaching Black history. There is actually a law in Florida that says they have to teach Black history. There's a law on the books. Only 11 of the 67 counties in Florida are actually following that law. So the fact of the matter is, Governor DeSantis is a lawbreaker. Unless there's a new law gonna be passed, but it hasn't been passed so far, so that makes him a lawbreaker. So that's my comment. So my question actually is, do you think that rhetoric, which is really what we're talking about, a lot of rhetoric against teaching Black history, a lot of rhetoric against CRT, a lot of rhetoric. Do you think that rhetoric actually leads to the violence? In other words, if you talk about it enough, something happens. People feel empowered to act violently against you. Okay, that's my
You need a
question.
microphone.
Oh, and one other thing on that. There is a Dr. Ursula Orr at Arizona State University who's done several books and papers and studies about this. So really, it's a little rhetorical because really she has come to the conclusions in her studies that rhetoric can, and will lead to violence.
I would just like to say,
You can come back in.
if you want me to answer that question concerning rhetoric and violence, there was a time frame in history that never happened before called January 6th. And if you look at that time frame and you look at what was stated prior to that, up until that date, you had a lot of rhetoric, you had a lot of action in the background. So things you say can really be taken out of context, taken in context, and turned into violence and other things. So that can't happen. Yeah.
Which brings me back to the thing that happened right here in Douglas County, where somebody's trying to deliver a package, and they're called every kind of N-word. Actually, it wasn't Negro, it was N-word.
Right.
In the book, and threatened because the person said, I don't like Black people. So, to say, oh, that's free speech? No, that's violent speech. And it's what do you call it? What's the word I'm looking for? It's speech that inspires violence.
Terroristic threat, maybe? Or inciting.
Fighting words is what the law calls it. And I have a question about that too, just on that subject. What do we do in Douglas County? Do we need, there's a hate law now in this state. We don't have one necessarily at the county. Is there legislation we need? Is there, I thought they passed it. Oh, okay. What do we need to do in the county to strengthen our community and make it a safer place for everyone, all of our citizens to live, and not have those kind of things happen where somebody isn't held responsible and accountable for that kind of behavior? How do we turn that tide locally? If all politics is local, what can we do here?
I think we start with engaging the people more, and educating the people more. If we let people know what's going on, they're much more likely, to get out and want to do something about it. And I think that we're doing a good job in Douglas County. Like we talked about, like we said, we did have our incident with the FedEx driver that ended up making national news. And we are determined to do what we need to do to get justice for, in that situation. And I think that if we do that, then people will see that, hey, we got a little teeth over here. And that's, I think that's what we start with. We start with educating the people, engaging the people, and especially the young people. So, this is very near and dear to them, because that's one of the things that they pay attention to the most is injustice. So,
Any other questions from our live panel?
If I may just comment on that topic, not only did the homeowner threaten the FedEx driver, he made with a very clear threat, it seems to me, say, if you come back here again, I'll show you how much Black Lives Matter. Now, how would you interpret that other than to mean, I'll show you your life doesn't mean a thing? Not only that, he struck the vehicle, it said, with his dog stick. That's not just free speech. He damaged somebody's vehicle. So,
and protecting property is the police. That's police
police
business.
responsibility.
That's police
Protecting property,
business.
no question. So I'm hoping that our local law enforcement agencies might do some follow-up work with regards to that particular situation. Just my 2 cents on that.
Well, thank you on that, Dr. Bill. Any other questions from our panel, from our live audience?
Great job.
All right, thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
That's a long drive.